Welcome to Washington Policy Center on the Go, WPC on the Go. We are excited to have this episode today. We're going to be featuring our directors from the Centers for Healthcare and Workers' Rights, Elizabeth Hovde, as well as our director for the Center for Government Reform, Jason Mercier. And we're going to get into issues ranging from the Washington CARES Act to the looming court case on the income tax for Washington state, as well as more. So make sure to stay tuned for all of that. Before we get started, I just want to shout out our Farm Hall event coming up in December 5th, on December 5th. If you're in the Ellensburg area, make sure to check that out. It's going to be a good time of food and drinks and talking about policy issues that matter to our agriculture sector in Washington, a sector that gets very overlooked a lot of the times by some of the parts of the state that don't interact with it directly. So that should be a good time. And then as a reminder, we're going to be monitoring the questions and answers box here. So make sure to put your Q&A in the chat in that box if you have questions for either Elizabeth or Jason. So we're going to start with Elizabeth. So welcome, Elizabeth, to WPC on the Go. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for being here.
All right. So where are we on WCARES? As you know, most people here probably are aware this program is going to be enacted. It's going to tax people to fund this long-term care benefit. There have been committee meetings and things like that recently. So what is the sort of state that we're in leading into 2023, broadly speaking?
Well, the big news that the state is pushing and that they recently concluded work on was an actuarial study to see if the Washington CARES Fund could now be solvent. For a couple of years now, we have heard it is not solvent even before it begins, and that it was going to be troubling to have people opting out of this tax, worsening the solvency situation. If you remember, there was a constitutional amendment that would help investment funding for this account that was shot down by voters. So they've all been kind of worried about how this is going to get funded for the projection timeline of 75 years, which is how solvency is decided. So 2 years ago, Milliman, a actuary firm, they did a report on the WCARES fund that said it would not be solvent at the 58 cents per $100 that people make. And then this year, just now, they have determined that it will be enough if the legislature does not make changes, some of which are being proposed by the commission. So it's interesting to me. There are things that helped it. Investment outlook improved, as did wages would be coming in higher because the law was delayed 18 months and the benefit is not raising along with that 18 months. So there are, I think it can work if you move the numbers around. I think it's important to remember that solvency is not the point of this. It's a bad tax that will harm workers more than it will help them, in my opinion. And, we have to remember that all payroll taxes seem to go up or do go up. I don't know if all is the right word, but workers' comp goes up. The paid family medical leave increased by 50% already in just a few short years. So I don't think the track record is on the side of keeping the rate at 58 cents per $100. So that was the big news in the commission meeting.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is it normal for a policy with a big program like this to have such back and forth on whether or not it will function as advertised? I mean, is that usual to have such a wavering variability as far as is it going to be solvent or not?
The timing is definitely a concern. The legislature is about to begin. They're trying to get energy behind this program. They're hosting webinars every month that tell people how much they need this benefit and how good it's going to be for our community. There's a huge marketing campaign, and it's hard for me to, really rely on the headlines that are coming out about this. And the most interesting part was that if you watch Milliman present their actuarial study, they clearly say that all the projections are extremely sensitive to various movement on any of those numbers: wages, population, investments, and any legislative activity going on around the fund. So they showed a gray chart that shows one line that shows it's solvent, with about, I don't know, 20, 30 or more gray lines. It was like a big gray block by the time you're done really looking at this thing, that it could be solvent. It might not be, based on various variables. So I think that I think the headline is being overplayed. And again, even if it is solvent, which would be great, there's a lot of people stuck paying this tax starting in July. So I hope it's solvent, right? We all hope it's solvent and can actually try to deliver on some of its promises. But bigger than solvency is just the misguided notion that this offers any kind of peace of mind for Washingtonians. This will not pay for their long-term care. It takes money away from them today for a need they might have in the future. And in many cases, you have low-income workers being taxed 58 cents per $100, just like high-income workers, and it's being paid to high-income workers at the end of the day. So it's just nonsense. In my opinion, it's a misguided social program.
And if I'm not mistaken, one of the other things that was discussed in a recent committee meeting was the idea of the portability, right? If you pay into this program for so many years and then you move out of state, are you going to be able to get the benefit? Where does that look like? Based on what they've discussed and what your sort of perception is, does that look like it's going to be something that will be adopted, or something that they're just kind of bringing up because it's been such a popular topic amongst people who are going to have to pay the tax?
You're exactly right. It's been a huge complaint of the WA Cares Fund. They call it the WA Cares Fund. I usually say Washington Care Funds, and it's really the long-term care law. It's all very, very mixed. But in any case, portability was one of the things that people decried, right? If you pay in your whole working life and you move out of state after retirement, there's no WA Cares benefit for you. And a reminder, the benefit is a lifetime benefit of $36,500, which in some cases for like nursing home care would only pay for 3 months of care. It would afford more money for family caregivers that are giving you care in your home if you need long-term care. But in any case, the portability was a huge concern of people's. And so there has been a work group within the commission overseeing the long-term care law that has been talking about options for portability that they are going to recommend to the legislature. And what they're recommending looks like, they're finalizing the report, but it looks like what the recommendation will be is to allow people to take the benefit, if they qualify for long-term care and if they've been involved in this, and if they've paid more than 1 year of taxes toward this program, they would be able to choose to pay in for the rest of the 9 years that are required to reach the 10-year vestment. So even though they're no longer in Washington or being taxed, and they could elect to voluntarily give that tax money over to the state to get a long-term care benefit. That'll vary. If you've paid in a year, they don't expect people to sign up for this. If you've paid in 9 years, they probably do expect you to sign up for it, I would assume. So they're looking at that.
And again, just do you feel like it's likely to pass, or is it just kind of up in the air at this point?
I don't think it'll pass. I think it's a nice gesture and it's being made to quiet the masses of discontent. But, the very recommendation says that the recommendation is contingent upon finding an offset for those portability costs. And DSHS, ESD, the agencies overseeing finances within the fund, said there would be large administrative costs to handling portability. A reminder, we're the only state with this program. It's not like you can just go to another state and say, hey, our guy moved to your place and what can we do? This is a big undertaking, I think. And so with that contingency on the recommendation, I highly doubt lawmakers will pass it. They've already been bragging about solvency. This would alter that report considerably, and I don't think portability will happen.
So I want to follow up on that, but really quick before I do, someone in the chat is wondering if there's an email or another place where you can voice concerns about this program or speak to people in, is there like a website for that or an email address or anything to take comments for
There,
that kind of thing?
yes, I've written a few times about this. So first of all, a quick thing to say is go to my blog on WPC's site, either healthcare or worker rights. And I go into, I usually list the website where the meetings are located for these meetings of the Long-Term Care Supports and Trust Commission. I'm getting the name wrong. The website is listed there, and they also list an email to send comments to. They take public comment as well during those meetings.
Yeah. So
But
I just put in the chat the December 9th meeting that you wrote about on your blog that's coming
great,
up. So that there should information should be there. But again, WPC, our website will have that if you look for Elizabeth's blogs.
thank you.
Okay, so but back to what we were talking about with that, with the portability and the fact, and you mentioned that we're the only state that has this kind of a program. I think not that long ago you wrote about how this could be other states could be looking at this program to see does it seem likely other states might try to adopt something similar, or do you think that this will be one of those cases where they're looking and they see kind of a car wreck and maybe go a different direction?
I think it's both. I definitely think enough states, especially states who are keen on social programs, I definitely think they're seeing their Medicaid long-term care cost rising and rising and rising with our growing and graying population. I don't think interest will go away for doing something to alleviate the government's Medicaid costs. And that's a really big point. Medicaid is being abused like a long-term care insurance program. That is where I think policy energy needs to be, is curbing abuse of that system, making sure that people use their life savings or use their own resources to pay for their life needs, not rely on the government and get those assets and other things onto family members. So I think that's a big point of policy that we should be pushing for, not creating more dependency on the government, and really truly preserving a safety net that we need. We need a safety net for people who are aging and don't have help and don't have finances. But we're not controlling our safety net well. Instead, we've chosen to widen it to people who are in need and people who aren't in need. And that's the big problem I see. But you asked something else that I was getting to an answer on, and now I've totally
Oh,
forgotten.
if you think, this will sort of be a train wreck that
Oh,
states,
yes.
steer away from ultimately.
Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah.
I think that other states are looking at it, and again, I think they'll keep looking at it. What they have learned from Washington's train wreck is that you don't allow an opt-out. We've had over 476,000 people opt out. There are more on the way, so it's nearly 500,000 now. In January, a whole new exemption category opens up for some disabled vets, military spouses, workers on non-immigrant visas, and people who live out of state. So when that happens, it's going to open it up again, and we're going to see more exemptions granted. So I think what other states are going to do is learn that you don't give anyone an opt-out. This is a social program, and just everyone pays no matter what you have. I think they'll learn that lesson.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you almost start realizing there's so many exceptions that have to happen. Maybe the program isn't designed well, right? Like maybe there's a reason why you have to have all these exemptions because of things like portability being unfair, or one of the other aspects, of technical aspects of this is the idea of recertification, which would help with the solvency costs. I think that was also brought up, if I'm not mistaken. What's the
Yeah.
status of that? Of course, the idea, for if you're not aware, if you opted out because you already have a private long-term care plan, needing to recertify the fact that you still have that long-term care plan so that you can't sort of use that as a way to say, oh, I'm opting out of that tax, I'm going to cancel my plan, and now I don't have to pay for long-term care at all. Um, what do you think? What is the updates on recertification as a topic?
Good recap on that. And let me just say, for people who are saying, man, I haven't opted out yet, I got to get on it. You can't unless you had a plan purchased by November 1st of last year, so 2021, now that we're in November again. So don't rush out and think you have to do anything right now. If you didn't have it purchased by November 1st, 2021, this is not applying to you. But for the people who did opt out, attesting that they had private long-term care insurance through a private plan, they, like Donald said, some people might have dropped those plans after they got the exemption because the law said it would be a one-time attestation. I've always encouraged people that, for a lot of us, long-term care insurance isn't a bad thing. You really want to weigh your options there. And further, I do think they will come back and require you not just to say, yeah, I have it, but I think they'll be requiring proof. And that is what this commission is talking about when it comes to recertification. So they are suggesting to the legislature that everyone has to prove they had a long-term care before November 1st of 2021 to keep their exemption current. It has to, your plan would have to be in force to this present day whenever they asked you for that proof. And right now there's talk about whether that would be, the suggestion is it would be no more than once a year, but no less than every 3 years. And that it would also stop happening after 10 years, because they figure people who have paid in 10 years are pretty invested in their plan. So that's the recommendation right now. That's going to have a lot of people up in arms that, you know, the law was written in a way that said one thing and people made decisions based on what it said. They followed the law. And now the law is being changed in a way that could adversely impact them. For a while, it was being talked about even if people who didn't have plans intact would be penalized. And apparently that is not on the table anymore. It would just be a recertification. If you don't have it, you're thrown back into the pool, the tax-paying pool. What I don't know, and I'm trying to find out, is do those people also then regain the lifetime benefit? Because the law also said, if you opt out, you will never be eligible for the lifetime benefit. So I am going to closely watch that too, that if they're going to change the law to throw everyone back into the tax-paying pool, if they dropped their long-term care insurance for whatever reason, then I would hope they are also changing the law in a way that lets people, after they paid in 10 years, get the benefit. But again, there are so many conditions by which you might not get this lifetime benefit. I think it was written in that way. I think it was written in a way to ensure maximum pay-in and very limited payout. You know, they're trying to pass it off as an insurance plan. And that's what all insurance does, right? They hope 10 of us get in an accident instead of thousands of us if we're in our cars. So that's how this has been crafted. And yet this is a program that doesn't guarantee you a thing. And I will not call it a premium. I will keep calling it a tax. It's a payroll tax. It's not buying you anything, for sure.
Yeah, that I was gonna. You definitely read my mind with the question on, you know, if you have to recertify and you can't, do you get that? It feels a little bit like you know, the taxpayers are Charlie Brown, and this Walk Cares program is Lucy with the football, and they're telling you just need it once, and then you bring it out, and sure enough, you trip and fall. So hopefully they make some kind of an exception for these people. But like you said, I do think it's just another way that this program is showing cracks, and it's not a great designed program, and probably shouldn't be treated like it's this
Yeah.
holy grail we need to protect.
I'd love to bring up one more thing too. One
Yeah,
of
please.
the work groups with this commission is also looking at a way in which if you're stuck in this program, you're going to be paying into it. Maybe you'll retire here and actually get to use it if you need long-term care. But let's say all that happens. The state has been really strongly saying you can have peace of mind. You'd have a little bit of money taken out of your paycheck every paycheck, and it's going to be fine. You got peace of mind. And as I've been making the point, 36,500 for any of us who have walked with people through long-term care know this is not a big amount. So this work group has been set up to try to work with the industry on having a wraparound policy that is sold to people who are in the Washington Cares Fund area, to then also have something that takes care of them when that runs out. Because the reality is that could run out in 3 months and then people are right back on Medicaid. So it is in the state's best interest, it's in the industry's best interest to create a wraparound program. But what I'd love to see is just the law repealed. So many cracks, such a hardship, I think, on low-income workers to take money from them today for a program they may never need when we're barely able to make some of our bills meet in this inflationary time. So we'll keep pushing for repeal, but I do think instead what will happen is some of the tweaks, but not, I don't see portability happening. I do see a wraparound product happening.
Got it. Well, thank you for that. Before we end, I did want to also bring in the Washington Universal Healthcare Commission that's happening. So they recently have announced that they are accepting applications for an advisory member for a committee that's on. Do you just want to remind folks about this commission, and then maybe some of what your thoughts are about the applicants for this new committee that's going to be studying some of the policy?
Sure. Yeah, the legislature they've set up over the last 30 years several work groups or commissions or committees to look at making Washington the first state in the nation with universal health care, for better and for worse and worse. So what they did this time is they set up a commission that doesn't have an expiration date. This commission can meet forever and pave the path toward universal care. And what's been interesting about this commission when they're meeting is that they don't seem to have any of the money answers that would prevent too much going into this until we even know that, the effort has failed in other states, and it doesn't look like they've looked at those states yet to figure out why they failed. And the reason they failed is because it's a lot of money. But they've set up a financial technical advisory committee to tackle that part of the problem. So they are looking for commission members to be on this advisory committee that will help them figure out the monetary piece rather than just the wish list thinking of everyone gets care that the government supplies and that taxpayers are paying for. So if anyone has expertise in the areas at which they talk about, I would encourage you to apply. They need people on there with a realistic look at bringing in universal healthcare, not just people who share the vision for it, but people who say, here's how it's not going to work getting a federal waiver for this or that, or here's how much it's going to cost. So Donald, I will put in the chat section
I've already got you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, if you have expertise in insurance funding and federal type medical money stuff, look at that. We want you on the commission too. I want you on the commission.
I was going to say, I think it would be for the good of Washington if we've got some clear-minded thinkers on that panel. So, well, thank you very much for that update, Elizabeth. I really appreciate it, and thank you for your time on the show today.
You bet.
Okay, we're going to switch over now to Jason Mercier, and I'm sure it's going to surprise all of you that Jason has been working relentlessly on the income tax issue. So I thought we should start with maybe the fun blog you wrote there about a dumbfounded IRS attorney, former IRS attorney, I believe. Do you just want to give a brief update on his thoughts on the income tax, capital gains income tax, state of Washington deal that we're That's a
Yeah,
big
thank you, Donald. So it's always good to know that you're not crazy and other people who look at what Washington does has the same response that you do. So out of the blue, I received an email from a 30-year vet in the Department of IRS's general counsel office. So he was an attorney for the IRS for over 30 years. And he contacted me out of the blue to let me know that what Washington is doing is an income tax. It is not an excise tax. And my response to that was, I know. But we went a little bit further, and he actually allowed me to interview him and ask him about the arguments the state of Washington was making and ask him how this is treated across the country and the world. And as you teased in the intro, his response was he was just dumbfounded by the arguments that Washington was making. And he couldn't see any way logically the state could win if what we're talking about is whether or not it's an income tax or an excise tax. That should be all that we're talking about because that's the only legal question before the justices. But unfortunately, as we know, sometimes courts make decisions beyond the law and they start to come out of their lane and start to enter the legislative lane. And, those that have tuned into this broadcast and listened to me for a couple of years now, I've been really confident that we were going to win and that we still will win this lawsuit. But that faith has been a little shaken in the last couple of months because our Supreme Court, not on tax issues per se, but on some of their civil issues, it's very clear they have left the realm of adjudicating and entered the realm of policymaking. And that's a little bit concerning as we move to this case next January.
Yeah, well, and speaking of, maybe stepping outside your lane, this income tax battle is looming. The last, sort of status of this bill has been declared unconstitutional, null, void by that Douglas County judge. And yet we have the Department of Revenue trying to collect this tax before the Supreme Court decision is going to be made. What's the current status of that, and where, what do we see? I believe there was some pushback from a citizens action group, if that's not mistaken.
Yeah, we're about to have Thanksgiving, and I feel like I'm taking us back to Halloween as we go through the horror story of this odyssey that is this capital gains income tax. But let's go back into time. On March 1st of this year, an Inslee appointed judge in Douglas County ruled very clearly this is an unconstitutional income tax and it is void, invalid, and inoperable. So that ruling basically means that bill the legislature passed is unconstitutional. Now, the Attorney General at that time did not request a stay, which meant that ruling went into full force and effect, right? That was back in March. So after that ruling, I sent the Department of Revenue several records requests because I wanted to figure out, this judge has invalidated this tax. What are you going to do? What is your response to this going to be? And the answers I kept getting back was, well, we haven't quite decided yet. We have a lot of time to make that decision. Now, one of those public records I got, it was something I wish they would have done. And it was a draft statement that it was circulated inside the agency that said, in light of this ruling, the tax is no longer moving forward and we can't act on it. So, they at least had the right take the first time, but unfortunately they didn't follow through with that. So that was back in March and April. So we fast forward to this summer in September and the fall in October, and the Department of Revenue started formal rulemaking, which was very surprising. You're going through formal rulemaking to implement a tax that has been declared unconstitutional, and there is no stay of that ruling. It is in effect. And we follow back up with revenue saying, what in the world's going on? And at the same time, they actually, as the governor was drafting his budget, they did a budget submittal for the upcoming budget asking for funds to implement this tax that's been declared unconstitutional. So those are kind of two very surprising actions to take if you're planning to follow what the courts have ruled. And the Department of Revenue said, don't worry. We are just doing a favor to taxpayers. We're just giving them this guidance just in case down the road the Supreme Court says that this tax is valid. So don't worry, this is just guidance and we don't plan to do anything. Well, apparently that was not the entire story, because just a couple of weeks ago, nearly 8 months after this tax was ruled unconstitutional, the Attorney General finally decided to go to the state Supreme Court and ask for a stay. And basically the Attorney General's argument was, we think it would be better for taxpayers to pay this tax and to submit their tax returns to the state of Washington while you, the court, are deciding this, So just in case down the road you decide to uphold it, taxpayers won't owe penalty and interest on this. So talking with attorneys, it is very unusual to wait 8 months to ask a stay. It is almost unprecedented to go directly to the Supreme Court to ask for that. But that's where we are right now. And on November 29th, we will have a decision from the Supreme Court if Washingtonians are going to be required to pay a tax that has been ruled unconstitutional before there's a final decision in the case.
Wow. And how long before you would expect the final answer from the actual constitutionality of the tax? What's that time difference going to be?
So the timeline we're on right now, so on November 29th, it's called an en banc and min conference. And what's notable about this is generally those are determined, these type of questions are determined by the court clerk. But the fact that it's the entire conference, it's going to be all 9 Supreme Court justices behind closed doors are going to meet. It won't be streamed. There won't be public access. There won't be ability to hear their decision making. They're going to decide whether or not to grant the Attorney General's request for the Department of Revenue to be able to collect this tax before a final ruling. The oral arguments on the actual merits of the case are going to be on January 26th of next year. This tax, if you followed what the legislature wrote, is due April 17th of next year. It's very unusual to have a decision out in that short of amount of time. What I think will likely happen is shortly after oral arguments, you may see a 1-page order from the court, either saying constitutional or unconstitutional, with full opinion to come months down the road. But that's the timeline that we're on right now. But you have a situation where, this is not like a change to the sales tax or change to the B&O tax or change to the property tax. This is a brand new tax that has never existed. So you're basically asking taxpayers to go through the administrative process of complying with a brand new administrative structure, paying taxes that they've never paid before to the state of Washington, submitting their federal income tax returns, and the possibility that all of that was for naught and they've lost access to that money for many months.
It's mind-boggling to hear it all laid out, and I'm glad you opened this segment with it's nice to hear you're not crazy, because that's kind of how I feel a little bit when I'm hearing this all explained. Because if I was trying to read this and piece it together myself, I might think there is no way that I'm understanding this correctly, because this just seems so counterintuitive and backwards and just whack. I do want to draw your attention to a question we have in the chat, which says, Jason, would the federal definition of a capital gains as an income tax be grounds for a writ of certiorari if the state Supreme Court determines that the capital gains tax is not an income tax?
So there are 2 different issues on this, and let me address the first one. We already have a letter from the IRS unequivocally saying this is an income tax, because that's how everybody in the world treats this. However, the IRS usually will stipulate how a tax is phrased at the local level. So that doesn't change what the tax is, but what that means is, should this tax be upheld by the state Supreme Court as a valid excise tax, that means that those taxes paid to the state of Washington will not be deductible against your federal income tax return. Because if the state of Washington wants to play the game that's an excise tax, then you're not going to be allowed to deduct it as an income tax against your federal return. So Washington taxpayers will be at a disadvantage that no other taxpayer in the country will face because of this game being played by the state of Washington. Now, the question was really asking, well, is there a recourse beyond the state Supreme Court on this? On whether or not it's an income tax, no. This is, because it's not necessarily that an income tax is prohibited by our Constitution. It's that property taxes have to be uniform and at no more than 1%. Right? That's that you could have a flat 1% income tax. What you can't have is a 7% income tax with a non-uniform base, and that's what this capital gains tax is. So that issue is strictly state interpretation. There's no federal recourse on that. However, because Washington tried to play this game of it being an excise tax, they did not write it the way an income tax is usually administered. And that runs into potential Commerce Clause violations. So there is a chance that if this is upheld, you could have a new federal challenge going to the U.S. Supreme Court, not on whether or not it's an income tax, not on whether or not it complies with Washington's Constitution, but because of the games of how they structured this, whether or not it violates the U.S. Constitution as an unconstitutional excise tax for violating the Commerce Clause.
if it were to, God forbid, get to that level, and let's say that the Supreme Court did manage to overturn that, would that render it null and void in Washington State altogether, or would that be something where it sort of gets sent back to Washington and then they try to restructure it? What would that sort of look like if the U.S. Supreme Court tried to overturn the case based on that Commerce Clause violation?
So I think you have several possible scenarios, both at the state court and then at the U.S. Supreme Court. On the state court, what should happen is the court just invalidates this, just like the trial court, as an unconstitutional income tax that did not comply with the 1% of uniformity. You could have a situation where they say, well, it's not an income tax, it's an excise tax, and then we're going to allow it to go forward. The reason why we're all going through this to begin with, nobody wants a standalone capital gains tax because it's really poor tax policy. It's extremely volatile. Right? California does not have budget problems because of their wage income. They have budget problems because capital gains are part of their income tax returns, and that's what drives that volatility. So from a budget standpoint, that's not what you want. So why did Washington do this? Well, we have public records that they did this because Washingtonians won't amend the Constitution for an income tax. And they were trying to set up a test case to see if the Supreme Court will rule that we don't own our income, and therefore you don't need a constitutional amendment for a graduate income tax. And that is exactly the brief that the Washington Education Association filed. They filed the brief to the same state Supreme Court saying, we want you to rule that Washingtonians don't own their income, so the legislature can come back and pass a graduate income tax out of the constitutional amendment. So that's the third scenario. They could say, well, you know what, every ruling we've issued for the past 100 years is wrong, and Washingtonians don't own their income, and legislature, do whatever you want. On the U.S. Supreme Court question, it strictly comes down to that Commerce Clause. And if it is a violation of the Commerce Clause, there's no way that tax can stand in any way.
Got it. Okay. And then I guess, we did touch on this, but I did have a note to ask. Do you know of any other scenario where a law has been declared unconstitutional and it gets carried out as though it's going to be in effect, 8 months later without a stay? Is there any precedent for that kind of thing?
That's what makes this so bizarre. Usually what happens, and stays are routinely granted at the time of the original ruling, right? The losing party will say, Judge, with respect, we think you're wrong. We want you to stay this upon further review from a higher court. That happens all the time. That did not happen here. There was no stay. We went 8 months forward before the Attorney General decided, maybe we should try to do something to allow the Department of Revenue to collect this. So from what I have been able to gather, there is not another scenario that I can point to where this has occurred.
Okay. Well, we'll shift. Lastly, there was a new budget forecast, I believe, that came out recently. Wanted to talk about that really briefly. What did it look like, and what does it mean for the ability of a sales tax cut, something that you have been proposing and standing up for?
Yeah, so we did just have our state revenue forecast last week, and usually I can have a pretty good feel for what's going to happen, right? Because you can see the monthly collections, and those generally will track with your economic indicators. But this was the first revenue forecast, I think, in several years that I did not know what to expect, because we had continued to see monthly collections come in above expectations, but literally every economic indicator was flashing red warning lights. Danger, Will Robinson. We are moving toward an area of serious economic uncertainty. So notwithstanding those economic indicators, the revenue forecasts actually increased yet again the projections over the two budget cycles by almost $1.5 billion. That was not expected. And it wasn't just me. The lawmakers on the council also said they were surprised that was what the economists determined. Now, a huge caveat on that, it does not assume a recession. So that forecast is hinging on the fact that the Fed's massive rate increases are going to have this soft landing that seems to be the holy grail that is out of reach, but that's the expectation right now from our state revenue forecast. So that being said, that is the blueprint that the governor's budget is going to be based on, that comes out in a few weeks. And that's going to be the opening way that the session is going to have a conversation. Now, the final conversation will be when the next revenue forecast comes out during session. But as of now, you continue to have revenues coming in far above expectations. So to your question, what should happen, what should not happen, and what do I think actually will happen? So
Yeah.
what should happen is what you're seeing happening in every other state in the country, and that is tax relief, providing some of that back to citizens that are providing more revenue than was expected, especially with the economic hardships everybody's facing right now with the inflation and the other pressures on housing costs. What shouldn't happen when you have a balanced budget and you have billions in reserve and you have increased revenue is tax increases, right? So those are the shoulds and the shouldn'ts. So do you really want to know what I think will happen?
I'm not sure my heart can take it, but go ahead.
Well, we just had an election that basically rewarded the current majority party for the decisions they've made for the past several years, which included tremendous spending growth and no tax relief. So if I am those same lawmakers and I've just been rewarded with reelection and increased margins in the legislature, what's my interpretation? Is my interpretation that we should put the brakes on spending and provide tax relief, or continue as we've done in the past? Right. And we know that the governor's budget, the very first buy in that budget is going to be $1.5 billion in compensation increases for state employees that were negotiated in secret this past summer. That's the first buy out of the budget. So I talked about a $1.5 billion increase in revenue. Well, there you go. There's your $1.5 billion of increased spending. I also know that every agency, I'll give the governor's office credit. The Office of Financial Management this summer sent budget instructions to agencies saying, it's basically the same thing I was saying. We've got some serious red warning lights flashing on the economy. Let's be a little bit disciplined in what we're asking the governor for in the budget. Well, apparently agencies tore that memo up because the agency budget requests have been double-digit increases, is what they're asking the governor to do. So a combination of more money coming in, $1.5 billion in compensation increases, and agencies asking for double-digit spending, that probably means tax relief's not going to be on the table from the governor's budget. And we may still even yet see some tax increase proposals.
And this sort of goes into speculation here, so feel free to bow out if you don't want to say. But if we were to hit a recession in a major way nationally, and that, let's say that happens right during the legislative session, right as they're figuring out budget detail stuff, do you think that would make legislators more or less inclined to provide relief to families that would be hurting from that recession? Or do you think it makes them double down into government programs to try to cover for that, for the recession and the harms that come out of that?
Well, this gets us back to the prior conversation on the capital gains income tax. What was the reason why we needed, from their standpoint, why we needed this tax? They said that we needed this tax because the low income pay too much in taxes and the wealthy don't pay enough. So what tax did they cut? What tax relief did they provide when they adopted this income tax? None. So if you're not going to do it when you've created a tax for that purpose and you've got billions of dollars in reserves and billions of dollars of increased revenue, I don't think you're going to now prioritize that when you've got a budget crunch.
Okay, well, that's a little unfortunate to hear, but I appreciate your candid response. So for anyone you're following that issue, make sure to check out all of the updates on washingtonpolicy.org. Jason's writing about this stuff pretty frequently, so check that out. So thank you, Jason, for your time, and I appreciate you being here.
Hey, Donald, I just
yes.
wanted to add that as Jason is
go ahead.
talking about no broad-based tax relief and the argument that taxes shouldn't be on the low income, they need to wait more that's not what's happening with this long-term care fund. So they have added a tax to low-income workers that they'll start paying in July, just more of the same.
That's exactly right, because when the argument is an income tax, is helpful for poor people because it's, our current tax structure is disproportionately impacting low income. The best thing, of course, to do is to make a uniform tax that's disproportionately impacting low income workers in the form of the Walk Cares Fund, of course. Well, thank you guys. Yeah.
Before you wrap up here, we're about to have a holiday here, so I got to end on some good news. I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Thank them all for their support. And as you can see here, this is what I'm expecting our lawmakers to be writing after the Supreme Court rules.
I was gonna say, I hope that you're a wizard seeing into the future for our sakes, Jason. And like he said, thank you guys so much for all of your support of WPC and our work. We really appreciate it. We hope you guys have a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll catch you on the next one. Take care.